Hi there, and welcome to Cures Within Reach's event on engaging community health in clinical trials. I'm Barbara Goodman, and I'm joined by Claire Thibodeau, and we're so pleased to organize this event and this conversation today. Cures Within Reach is a nonprofit focused on finding and funding clinical trials that test already approved treatments for new diseases, also known as medical repurposing. We're disease agnostic, we're geography agnostic, and we're institution agnostic. Instead, we focus on de-risking and catalyzing other funding to build the clinical evidence required for regulatory approval or for off-label use. Our current portfolio includes 50 ongoing clinical trials in 35 different diseases at 38 different institutions across 12 different countries in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, as well as Asia. 75% of our ongoing trials are in adults, with the remaining in pediatrics or a combination of adults and pediatrics. Roughly 85% of our trial are testing drugs, pharmaceuticals, but we also fund clinical trials testing devices, diagnostics, as well as nutraceuticals. Rare diseases has always been a major component and focus for Cures Within Reach, and we currently have 25 ongoing clinical trials in so many different rare diseases. Our oncology portfolio today includes 18 different ongoing clinical trials in 8 different categories of cancer, including 6 different blood cancer trials alone. Our neurology community includes 9 different clinical trials today, from neurodegenerative diseases and mental health like PTSD and depression, as well as in chronic pain. And finally, our growing infectious disease community includes 6 different trials today, and those are just a snapshot of some of the clinical trials we have. Our approach is additive to industry's life cycle management, also known as label extension and indication expansion. Over 90% of the funds that we provide to our researchers are in phase 1 and phase 2A trials, whether or not there's a commercial opportunity at the end. Our success could be on or off patent. It could also be on or off label. Instead, we focus on bringing treatment options to patients. And as I just mentioned, while our goals are for treatments to patients everywhere they are, most importantly, our success measure is how our funding is being raised by our researchers to do the next stage of those trials. In 2023 alone, over $16 million was raised by our funded researchers for those follow-on trials. And so far in 2024, our funded researchers are becoming just as successful. Today, we especially want to thank our health equity partners listed here at the top, such as Adtalem, Open Philanthropy, and the Searle Funds, as well as specifically thanking the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, who is moderating this session today. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Claire Thibodeau, my colleague, who's going to introduce the session.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks for everyone for joining us here today. As Barbara mentioned, Burroughs Wellcome Fund has been one of our funding partners, and with their support and the support of others, for the past several years, Cures has been able to fund community-based organization engagement alongside our clinical trials. We feel that this is very important part of clinical trials, not only to engage underrepresented communities, but also to strengthen the relationships between clinical researchers, communities, and address some of the distrust and other issues that face these relationships. Like I said, we've been doing this in the US since 2021, and we're very excited that in 2025, we'll be expanding this community-based engagement to trials in low and lower middle income countries. So different types of community organizations can be divided into 4 groups, each one providing an important connection point with the community. The first are healthcare CBOs, community-based organizations. Next, we have social service organizations, followed by faith-based organizations, And then finally, patient and disease-based organizations. Now, it would be impossible to talk about all of these different groups in the time that we have today, because they're all doing such great work and are really critical to the clinical trial process. But for today, we are focusing solely on healthcare CBOs. So these could be community hospitals, local healthcare clinics, federally qualified health centers, rural health organizations, any organization that may not be part of a larger academic or hospital-based system, but could be the first point of contact underrepresented patients have in the healthcare system, and so are very critical when it comes to clinical trials. And to help us with the conversation today, we have a great group of speakers for you. Our moderator is Tammy Collins from the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, and we also have speakers representing industry, academic research, and community health. So they'll all introduce themselves once we get to the panel, but I know that you're going to have a lot of great takeaways from their perspectives and their insights. So just to go over the program real quickly, in a moment, I'll be turning it over to Tammy Collins to get us started. We'll then move on to the panel discussion portion, followed by question and answers from you, the attendees. So please make sure to use the Ask a Question button that you'll find on the right side of your screen. Submit your questions and we'll share those with the panel. Then we'll do a quick closing and be on our way at 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tammy Collins to get us started. Tammy?
Hey, thank you so much for that. And before we get started with the panel, I thought I would also introduce to you the Burroughs Wellcome Fund if you are not familiar with it. So I'm Tammy Collins and a program officer here at the fund. Burroughs Wellcome itself, once upon a time, was a pharmaceutical company. And in the 1950s, they established a nonprofit arm of the company called the Burroughs Wellcome Fund. And in the 90s, they were able to break off and become a completely independent nonprofit foundation made possible by a gift from the Wellcome Trust. Today, our endowment hovers around $800 million, and we award between $35 to $40 million per year in grants to institutions, specifically in the US and Canada. Our mission is to serve and strengthen society by nurturing a diverse group of leaders in the biomedical sciences. Our goals are to improve human health through funding education, as well as powering research discovery in areas of greatest need. As a philanthropy, wanting to provide support to things that are important to do, but maybe are underfunded by NIH or other larger funding bodies. We accomplish our mission in two main ways, through competitive funding mechanisms, as well as what we term ad hoc funding. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those here in a second. And our primary focus areas are shown here. And while I don't have time to go into all of the details, I'll tell you a little bit about our regulatory science program, because that's most closely related to some of the work that we've also engaged in with Cures Within Reach. So I oversee our interdisciplinary sciences portfolio, as well as our regulatory science portfolio here. Actually, we just opened the call for proposals for the Innovation and Regulatory Science program. And this has been around about a decade to encourage innovation in developing new tools, standards, methods, and approaches to assess the safety and efficacy of products regulated by the FDA or other regulatory agencies. It provides $500,000 over 5 years. And one of our goals is also to foster academic regulatory science career pathways. More recently, we have been focusing our efforts on advancing equitable outcomes through the regulatory science program. We've even changed our rubric this year to include, as part of how proposals are evaluated, is it advancing equity in the healthcare process? So this is just to show you one of the examples. If you look back at the previous slide where I had the QR code, that'll take you to the page that's calling for our proposals. But this is just one example of a project that we funded last year in advancing regulatory science to assure that clinical outcome assessments are reflecting diverse patient experiences. All of our projects wound up addressing health equity in our last round, and you can also check out our website to see more about what those projects center around. But beyond our competitive funding mechanisms, we also support individuals on an ad hoc basis. So that's part of how we are connected to this work today in terms of funding community engagement for Cures Within Reach. We also have recently funded community ambassadors for the Voices of Black Women study through the American Cancer Society, and we are embarking on a larger approach to think of how we can engage the community more in research and support researchers in this space. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge others at the fund, especially our president and CEO, as well as Eliza Geary, a new program associate with my team, and Lema Hadar, our program coordinator. The purpose of why we are here today is to really learn what community health organizations wish PIs and clinical teams at research institutions knew, and to discuss how to engage with community health organizations successfully to achieve win-win scenarios for each, both the research team as well as the community, and to hear opportunities and challenges for community organization engagement. So with that being said, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and say a few comments about your own perspective and experience engaging with community health organizations. And I will start maybe with Diane Bryson.
Okay, thank you so much, Tammy. I'm glad to be here with you. I have, I guess, brief experience been in the pharmaceutical industry, mostly on the commercial side, the last 30 years. I spent the last 5 years on the clinical operations side, applying what I learned on the commercial side to better engage with communities. And my perspective is that I have had to really learn that as a sponsor, we have been so focused on our brand and not the patient. We're focused on getting the prescription written. And I learned through different projects that we have got to engage with the community. We need to go where the people are and not just, especially for clinical trials, not expect to wait for people to come to us.
Okay, thank you so much for that perspective. And next, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Dr. Abiola Ibrahim.
Thank you for having me here. A breast medical oncologist at UIC, originally from Nigeria. So clinical trial diversity is really dear to my heart. And my patient population is mostly diverse patient, minority patient, and that makes about 70 to 80% of our patient population, of which 50% of Black women. And my research centers on how do we get minority patients on our clinical trials? How do we get representation? Because when they project the demographics on those clinical trial results that has been FDA approved, we see a woeful representation of minority patients, particularly Black women. So the question is, how do we make sure that the next trial, the next meetings like San Antonio meeting that we're going to be having, or ASCO or AACR, does not keep on projecting that? And in so doing, in my capacity here, I'm also the liaison between our translational oncology program at UIC and the community advisory board. So I move around to get to talk to the community based organizations to get feedback and come back to the institutions and try to make adjustments in real time.
Thank you for that. Next, we have Dr. Anne-Marie McKenzie-Brown.
Thank you for having me here. I am an anesthesiologist and pain physician at Emory. I'm more of a clinician than a researcher. However, I I have learned a lot about community engagement through this process, and had there not been some support for community engagement, I never would have ventured into this area. And I'm really actually thankful for Cures Within Reach to expose me to this. I have learned a fair amount. Well, it wasn't hard to learn a lot because I knew nothing. And it has really opened my eyes to the importance of engaging the community when you're doing research, because if you have a population that you're doing studies on, is the way that they would see it, you want them to be part of it and part of that process, which I think is quite empowering to the community.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Beth Tamil.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Again, echoing everybody else, I'm super excited to be here today. I work for Erie Family Health Centers in Chicago. We're a relatively big federally qualified health center in Chicago with 2 suburban locations. And I am the manager of our research and academic partnership. So I work with any external research team that wants to do research with our providers or our patients. And so I've seen both the challenges of working with research teams and the incredible benefit and successes of how working with teams can benefit our community health organizations. And I'm excited to share what we've learned with you all.
Okay, thank you so much for all of your introductions. Also, I just wanted to provide a reminder to everyone to submit your questions in the platform. We have some questions we're going to ask the panelists, and then we'll move to the open Q&A where we will ask questions submitted by individuals on the platform. So first of all, before we get into the how, we wanted to talk a little bit more about the why. So maybe we can start with Dr. Ibrahim and give us more your perspective on why individuals should work with community health organizations, and talk about how you feel that they can strengthen clinical research in general.
All right. So maybe I'll start the why with being very, very factual. So as a researcher, if you do write a grant, there's that part where you have to write in, okay? If you write a trial, there's that part you have to put in. So the why, I think if you don't, why not should answer that, because you have to do it. But for it to not sound funny, and for it to be real, and for it to actually help you grow as a researcher or even as a clinician, even in your career, I think that it's important for you to integrate it with your lifestyle. I mean, your career style, not necessarily lifestyle, right? And apart from that, if we are talking about also the why question, is that we want representation, right? We want to truly represent the community that we serve. And I say this to say that most of the research that are being done, all these high-powered institutions, the MD Andersons and what have you. But now, if you really want to start, making sure that we decentralize, which is what is happening now. All this research are being decentralized from the MD Anderson of the world and all these huge institutions to involve other institutions and to even involve community center. So if you find yourself in that, outside of the high academic center, if you will, you have to start integrating this research part into your career pathway, so to speak. And I think I'll wait till before I get to the how do you do that. So let's just talk about the why first.
Thank you for that perspective. And Beth, maybe do you have any comments to add?
Yeah, I can jump in from our side. I mean, our mission is based on health equity, so absolutely being engaged in research is important to that mission. But also there are just some like really huge benefits in being involved in research. So we look for projects that have a really direct benefit to our patients. So we have one project where it's testing peer breastfeeding counselors. So that is a service that we don't do at Erie. And so that gives us an opportunity to give patients something that we don't have. We have another project that allows patients to access food boxes for an ongoing basis. So we know that that brings resources to us. But then also, if we're engaged with researchers at the beginning of the application phase, when they're thinking about what they're going to be applying for, we've had a lot of success at having them build what the intervention looks like, where it supports something that we're already doing. So an example, there's a project that we're working on right now that is around remote patient monitoring for blood pressure. That is an initiative that we've been working on for at least a year. And so the funding from that project allows us to really dig deeper into that and have the clinical expertise that we don't have to be able to look at the results of some of that stuff. And then I would just finally say, part of it is our goal of establishing long-term partnerships, not only for the purpose of research, but the purpose of being involved in our organization. So we have one research team that we were working on with kids who had early onset seizures. And that gave us access to a program where we now have a way to get them into more streamlined services for epilepsy. And we didn't have that ability to work with them previous to the research project. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks. And if our other panelists, either Diane or Dr. Mackenzie Brown, have anything to add?
Well, just in why I think it gives a broader perspective of the population that you're engaged in research with, and it helps to inform it. I think it makes you a better researcher.
And I would agree with you. And it helps to ensure that the research is, that the clinical trials reflect the real world. Another why is a hammer that's coming, and that's in the enactment of FDORA, the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act, that is actually requiring then the FDA able to require companies, sponsors to ensure that their clinical trials are diverse. And in order to get that diversity in your clinical trials, just as Abiola and Beth talked about, you have to go out to the community. If you're continuing to do your research in highly academic institutions, chances are your traffic is limited in nature. But to get more diversity in that, in the variety of participants, certainly going to the health-related organizations in the community will get you there.
Thank you all so much for your insight. I have another question centered around misunderstandings about engaging community health organizations. And Dr. Mackenzie Brown, would you like to share any of your experiences around this?
Yes, I just as I was saying, I came from a place of no presuppositions necessarily, just seeking to understand it, and I learned about the CABs, was it community action boards that represent the community, and one of the things that we did in using them as a resource was we had a brochure for our study. And I did not notice it, and neither did the student who was working with me notice it, but it was a completely non-diverse brochure representing, and this is for a study of patients with HIV. It was ridiculous, but she got a clip art picture from the internet, and that was the first thing that they picked up on. And we were so thankful that they did that before we were able to hand it out. And also we have I work at Emory and also along with Grady, and they have a clinic of patients, and so we wanted to hear from the HIV community, and it's like, where would you go is in a clinic there versus just in another setting that did not have that. And we asked them questions about basically what is it like to live with HIV. We weren't really asking questions about the study per se, but just what is your experience living with a person with HIV? Are there certain obstacles that you have, and certain barriers, and the barriers that we thought had no relationship to the barriers that they actually had. And it was really enlightening to us to hear from them about things that we thought would be an issue of, support services, which were completely not an issue, but there were other things that were much more of an issue, and we would have never known that if we did not engage with the community.
Thank you for sharing. And would any of our other panelists like to comment on this particular question?
I can jump in here, just because often we have researchers approach us and say, hey, can you recruit for this study? Without any understanding of our sites, how they work, what our workflows are like, what our EHR is like, what our patient population is like. So, one thing that I think is really important is getting to know the organizations and developing that partnership early before the study is going on, so that when you're thinking about a study to engage a particular site into, you've already got some of that information, because we've had so many researchers come to us either for recruitment or even hosting an intervention that it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and it just does not work. And it's frustrating on both sides because they have a protocol that they've already written out that they need to be responsive to, but they haven't done the work initially to really understand the context. So I would say identify some partners early on, start having conversations with them, and not about the research, but about who they are, what they're doing, what their motivation is, so that you're really getting a fuller understanding before you bring it to the site.
I just think that it's not a checkbox, right? It's not a checkbox that we check. And that's the mistake that we make. We write all the background, we spend hours, days on the background, we spend weeks on the method, and then 2 days to submit. Call. Can we quickly get this from the? No, that's not acceptable. And it shows, and I think that we should do it the other way around. And get them involved, and it's always very helpful. I wish I knew this. For a minute, I made it a checkbox, like, okay, last minute, I'm calling someone, I'm giving them a template, I've already sent them the letter. All I need is your letterhead and the signature. It doesn't fit well. So yeah.
I have to say, I fully agree with you. I had to learn that myself. And I have been able to see that we've been able to prove that we are more efficient when we build relationships with organizations, sustained relationships with organizations, so that we're not just supporting our clients in rescue, that we're with the study teams before the protocol is locked, so we can pressure test it with our community-based organizations and get that feedback. And we have found that when we do that, we're raising the possibility of people actually completing the study and you actually getting the data that you need. But we need to have sustained relationships that are not transactional. Otherwise, they call us helicopter researchers, that we come in and get the data we need and we go away. We want to build relationships that we can, I guess they get to know that they can count on us over the long haul.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. One more question before we get more into the meat of the how, and I think it's related to what we just heard, and that is in terms of developing those early partnerships, how would you recommend messaging the benefits and opportunities for community health organizations as collaborators in terms of what's in it for them to partner with you? So maybe we could start with Beth, if you have any comments, and then open it up for everyone else.
Yeah, I would say be really thoughtful about the time and effort you're anticipating, or the time and effort that it takes for something to happen. So an example, we had a project come to us a couple weeks ago that was aligned with our priorities. It's around getting adolescent women connected to birth control. And what they wanted to do is have our front desk staff screen potential teens. If they were eligible, they would give them a card that they would take to the provider. The provider would do a screener, add that screener into our EHR, get that data to them, and then the teen would join the intervention. And they were like, well, we have a $5,000 stipend for your site. And when you think it's changing the workflow for the front desk staff, it's changing provider workflow, there might be EHR modifications, there's communication to site staff about what's happening, there's training to providers. So being really realistic about what the time and effort it takes for something to happen. So at Erie, we always say we don't make money off of research, and we don't intend to, but we really want to make sure, because patient access to services is the highest part of our priority, that we need to make sure that we're offsetting the cost and effort of doing any research engagement. And so I think really building that into your budget early on and thinking really clearly, having that conversation with sites about what it would take logistically and how much that would cost is really important.
Thank you. Any other comments about messaging the benefits and opportunities for community health organizations to participate or to collaborate?
So it's a bi-directional relationship, right? It's not just them coming to be on our research, doing this for us and all that. If they have programs, you have to show up. You have to volunteer to let them know, hey, if you have any event, I'll be happy to come speak on your event or whatever. You don't even have to speak. You can be an attendee too, you can join them. They have a town hall, anything, like a lunch or cookout or stuff like that. Come in and bring your food or whatever it is. Just show support to what they are doing. Remember, it's the community. It's a bi-directional thing. And what I've had a lot of some people open something and I join them in whatever the structure they are opening in their based on the organization. So yeah, it's a bi-directional thing, not necessarily patient and not just that, yeah.
And I would add, because I fully agree, it is bi-directional. And some organizations have had bad experiences because the people who've come in have not done that. They have expected to get and not give. But I agree, it really is about relationship building. And I agree, sit down and have dinner, have coffee, go into their events and have them get to know you. Their experience may have not been so positive about even having they're protective of their people to participate in clinical trials. And so they want to make sure that they can trust that you're going to do the right thing. And the best way to do that is for them to get to know you.
It's funny, but both of you mentioned food, and it's interesting the role of food in kind of as an icebreaker to relationships, right? Because one of the things that we're asking with the community that's going to give a presentation, what can I do? Is like, if you could just bring dessert, or if you could just, bring food to us. But there's something special about food for whatever reason that is kind of a common language, per se.
Well, thank you all for your insights, and also wanted to provide another reminder to everyone online to submit questions in the platform. And so now we've already started kind of moving over a little bit into the how, but just to get more into the nuts and bolts of actually approaching and how to work with community health organizations. So maybe one of our first questions could be, how would you recommend finding and identifying a community health organization to work with? Whether Abiola or Dr. Mackenzie Brown would like to start off with that question.
Well, I'll start off because I had no idea. And I was very helpful, the videos that we had in training and learning about this. But thinking of my population, because one of the recommendations was to go to church and public buildings, but since it was like a specific condition, that didn't really make sense. And then I found out that our hospital of infectious disease has a relationship with one of the community advisory boards, and in fact there were 3 different ones that they had relationships with, and one of the nurses who worked with them was, I happen to know from other things, and she helped to connect me. And so there was a community-based one, and then there was one based with Emory, and then there was one based with Grady, and then there's one based with the health center. There were different ones, and there was one that dealt with women who had HIV. So once we found one, there were others that were involved but the challenge was not all of them were responsive to reaching out. And so there's some we reached out to who never got back to me. And then basically the criteria was if you responded to my emails or my phone calls, and then just that as a start, and then developing a conversation from there.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the good start, really, because you start with your institution first, and then you move from there. Like I said, I attend a lot of community events. So from attending a lot of community events, I get to see what they're doing, right? Because it's really very important for me to have that connection, because I really want to be that breast cancer go-to, especially when it comes to Black women in Chicago. So that is why it's of importance for me to actually go into my community and know what's going on and have that conversation and know what the barriers are, what the facilitators are, and calm down. We physicians, clinicians, we have to calm down for a high tower of the hospital into the community, because that is the people we are going to be treating. And from there, I was able to quickly know who I'm going to be working with, right? And then, of course, the CAB is also a good place, because remember, some of them are already in the institution already, but then having that good relationship with them works. So, and I kind of did a reverse, if you will, whereby if you have like 2-3 community organizations that you've had a relationship with, you can have them together as your own CAB. I don't know if that is making sense. So those are your own personal people, because they're like 2-3 groups of people that you've come together to form them as what you're doing. And now these are people whereby you can brainstorm with. You sit with and you just start jumping ideas and all that in the beginning, right? And they can, tell, I call it the grind machine, where we are grinding a lot of stuff together. And they're really very good with following up. Emails, it's very good, and they send it to you, and then you start bouncing off ideas, and that helps. And when I call them, which I will, 2 minutes to submission, hey, I need that letter of recommendation for whatever, they're happy to send it, right? Then it sounds real because they're a part of it. I just forgot to tell them that maybe I need an LOR. Then I say the last minute, then I call them, and they're not like, oh, they're happy to send it. So those are the way I was able to do it, and I'm still doing it. I'm still learning. And as you're putting the community health organization together, you also have to think about their time. Their time is precious to them. What is in it for them? And as you're working on the project, and it's fleshing out to something, they will work with you. I mean, I don't know how to explain how helpful they have been to me. Much more even helpful than I think I have been to them. So I think it's a must have, beyond that research that you're doing, more or less your career part as a whole.
And I'll just chime in here too. I think finding the right person at an organization to talk to is important. So like kind of investigating what research they've done in the past and how that's played out, or who's doing quality improvement or process improvement. And is there a team or is there a point person? Because we have a small department that does it, we do a lot of education with our providers to be like, just send them straight to us. But I think a lot of organizations don't have a point person to handle research. So really finding the best person for that situation that can be a champion. And really you would need to know the organization to find out what that would look like at the organization. Is there a clinical leader that does research sometimes? Or is it the process improvement or quality improvement team?
And I'd like to add, because I'm going back to when I first started working in the community and trying to engage with the community, I had to accept a certain level of vulnerability for myself, learning to being comfortable with being uncomfortable, that I'm going into areas that I don't know, and asking questions. And again, making myself available for them to get to know me a bit over time. And it does take time.
Thank you all for sharing your insight. Another question related to this, how would you encourage referrals to clinical trials by some of the providers that we're talking about?
By the providers or by people in the community?
The community healthcare.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, for me, I will say that when I gave presentations on, my particular clinical trial is on non-opioid treatment for pain in patients with HIV. And basically, I've dedicated my life to non-opioid treatments for pain. And I know that is an issue in the community. And they were like, we've never heard of this. This is we need to talk about this, that there is something that may be able to help with this. And nerve pain is just, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. I mean, that's just the worst kind of pain. And so when talking about what was really great is that there are people there who knew exactly what I was talking about and the kind of pain that you experience. And they were just like, wow, if there is something that could help that doesn't involve opioids and has very few side effects, we would love to tell, people in our community about this. So that was a very positive experience for me.
And I can jump in, like the researchers here are doing a great job of explaining what they do in lay terms. So also I think kind of thinking about the jargon that you use and the research language and thinking, all right, well, I've got my community hat on, so I need to be careful about how I'm saying things and how I'm framing things, because it can be really complicated and there's a lot of language that you wouldn't use at a community health center. And so just being cognizant of that, I think, can be important.
Any other comments around this question before we move on to the next one? Dr. Ibrahim, I saw that you had unmuted.
No, I mean, I totally agree with what they said. I mean, there's really nothing else to add.
So the next question centers around post-trial dissemination. So do you have recommendations for how to work with community health organizations on engagement centered around post-trial dissemination? And maybe Beth, we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, I would echo my last comment around language. When I first started, there was a project that was just wrapping up around chronic diseases. And they asked to do a presentation for the organization. I said, yes, that sounds great. The presentation was so complex that nobody understood what it was. And there wasn't like organizational specific information. So they didn't kind of break it down as the organization. And so that taught me like I need to be better on the community partner side to say like, okay, let me see what your slide deck looks like. Let's work through this so that it actually makes sense in our context and can be useful to our providers. And then that even more so with patients. So we are doing a community news or a community quarterly newsletter with results. We don't want to put something out there that people are not going to understand. And so really thinking through what that content is, how it's relevant to the situation, and how you're getting away from the language of kind of the research side, academic language, and thinking about how am I making sure that this is community language that can be understood. We actually, all of our dissemination materials, all of our project materials, we require to be done at 6th grade reading level, because we even know that some of our staff might have issues with reading as well. And so I think that can be a really important thing to make sure that you're doing with all materials, including the dissemination.
I'd like to add there that certainly lay summaries have become a lot more common, but remember that there are still individuals in the community who may have participated in a clinical trial and never did get results. And I think that we need to really emphasize up front that we do intend to give them aggregate results so that they know that they made a contribution. Also, as Beth was talking, it reminded me, we need to work with health literacy experts, really, to make sure that how we present that data is appropriate. I've learned through working with health literacy experts, even just the font we use. We should use a sans serif font, not New York Times. We need to create have a lot of white space around the words so that the eye gets a chance to rest. We need to provide pictures, and going back to the photos, that they need to look like the people who actually participated in the study so that they know that we saw them.
I think post-trial information really is very important. And the thing is, especially in the community I serve, it's important for the community to understand the impact of what they have done on the trial, right? And that is because it's going to make them want to do more, outside of actually us getting in touch with the participants themselves that were on the trial. But the participants on that trial is a representative of the community, right? Letting them know that, well, maybe 10% impact or from what, it's really very important. And there was a time I was actually toying with the idea of, when there's a San Antonio breast conference, post San Antonio, can we bring that to the community and discuss it? But I wasn't really very geared towards that, because then when I look at the representation of Black patients on our trial, I'm like, I don't think I can do that, because then I'm not sure I can answer those questions. We're not still looking good on paper. But I think those kind of impacts, like if there's increased clinical trial diversity, is something we have to celebrate and let them know that, hey, this is what we are doing. We're all working together. We are getting a seat at the table, and this is what the impact is in our practice. And then as far as outcome is concerned, again, outcome is the reason why we are doing all those things. And the community needs to understand that this is the outcome of what the interventions they've worked with us has been.
Thank you all for your insights. Before I move to the next question on funding, is there anything else that you would like to say in terms of working with community health organizations, preparing the clinical trials, anything related to them not being part of your institution system or being far away? Any other comments related to that before we move into our next question?
So the only one thing I just have to say is publication. We academicians, publication is what we live by. If a health organization has worked so hard with you, especially one or two people, and you're publishing all this data, please involve them. They have to be authors, right? Because I can't stress that enough. I think it's just a kind thing to do, very much.
And I'd like to add a current example of that. Actually, there is cardiovascular research that's being done out of Columbia in New York City. The PI there reached out to a community-based organization that serves the community that is defined in the protocol of the study. The organization, and so now that PI has made the executive director of that nonprofit organization a co-PI, acknowledging the benefit, acknowledging the value that organization is bringing to getting the study done, and elevating that to where the PI is. And they're going to be critical in helping not only to recruit people for the study, the nonprofit, but they're going to be critical to retention, and they deserve the credit for that.
Okay, thank you all so much for these wonderful insights. And the next question is centering around funding for community health organizations. So would you like to share your thoughts on who should be funding what, how, and when? Things centered around incentives, time, how to budget for working with community health organizations for all phases, both before, during, and post-trial. So any comments related to that? So maybe Dr. Mackenzie Brown, if you'd like to chime in first.
Well, I don't know that I have an opinion on who should be funding it, rather than it would be good to be funded. And just to know that one of the things that I found in working with some of these community organizations is that there's a sense that they've been the the research organizations have been the recipient of work that involves them, but they have not been the recipient of any of the benefits of that. And so there's a sense that it would be reasonable to compensate us for knowledge that you gain from working with our community. And I found that some were quite sophisticated in this as this becomes an increasingly common for them to do that. And so, like the very first meeting I was talking about, and they said, just stop right there. How much money are we talking about? And so I was kind of taken aback by that. But then I realized that they wanted to make sure that I wasn't only trying to take from them, but that this was going to be a partnership. And so I think that that's reasonable.
And I know it's hard sometimes to know how much time and effort it would cost. And like, so something that might happen at Erie might cost something different at a different organization. So like laying out specifically, so especially like, so previously researchers would give us their protocol, and now we ask them to like give us a list of all of the activities that we're going to be doing and because protocols can be like 12 pages long and very complicated, because we want to know exactly what we're going to be asked to do, and make sure that we're able to hold researchers accountable so that, if there's an ask that's outside of that, that we need to circle back and see if we actually have the capacity to do it. And then I just want to note too, line item budgets. I know many of our federal funding sources require line item budgets. But if there's any way to do like work without those, that would be helpful. So we have one partner that's funded by the NIH with their line item budget. They have us registered as a vendor. And so the like $40,000 that we get from them is a flat fee as a vendor relationship. And so we get to decide how to use that money without having to be like kind of nickeled and dimed, so it can go into like our infrastructure and our kind of our indirect costs. So just kind of putting the plug out there, that has always been the easiest for us to work with.
Yeah, and as you put in the budget, you have to start thinking about the length of your research, right? Whatever your projected time is, most times it's longer than that. And as you're putting in a budget, you have to start thinking about how do you retain the interest of your health organization, Right.
And also, I'd like understand that the sponsors are motivated. I heard this conversation around budgeting both at Scope earlier this year and SCRS this year, and concerns that sites had about asking for budget. The sponsors are motivated by both the latest guidance, which speaks to how are you getting involved with the community, what's your community engagement plan, and then again with FDORA, FDORA, being enacted, that is going to be a must also. So the sponsors are motivated. It's a matter of, though, asking this, as you're submitting your budgets, including community engagement in your budget, and probably talk to the sponsors and see where their minds are on that. But we're in the early stages of figuring out what those costs are, but ask, really, and the sponsors do want you to put this into your budget.
Yeah, and coming from a philanthropic organization, just chiming in that that might be another source of support as well for individuals looking for funding around community engagement. We've actually also been working on a strategic plan for how we can help advance health equity, and hands down the top thing that really has come up is to engage with communities. And so we envision that we're going to be providing even more funds through larger projects in the future in projects that incorporate the community in research. So I just wanted to send one more reminder to submit questions in the platform. Soon we're going to be asking those questions. And we have a few more for the panel before we get to the audience's questions. And this next one is about faith. And how does faith impact engaging community organizations, and how is it treated in community health organizations? And Dr. Ibrahim, would you like to share any thoughts around this aspect of working with CHOs?
Right. So, I mean, I serve a minority community, and we do know, especially Black women, are most likely to be faith-based, religious, right? So, in as much as we have faith-based organization, we have the health-based organization, but we have to understand that the people, most of the people that are especially in this minority group are religious, right? And they're quick to talk about God, about their faith. And this is a time with which personally I lean in, because again, it's like to keep the relationship going. And most physicians or clinicians, we kind of shy away from the faith of people that we work with, because when they talk about it, we act like we didn't hear or something invincible just happened. So yeah, once they bring it up or just in a conversation, I'm happy to do that. Next weekend, from one of the community health organization I'm working with, she invited me to our church. Can you please come and talk? I'm like, oh, sure. Right. So I'm happy to lean into it. Again, it's a bi-directional relationship and not just a one-sided relationship.
All right, and I'll just leave this for if anyone has anything else to add. Otherwise, we can start asking some of the audience Q&A. All right, so one of the first questions we have from the audience is, how does pediatrics impact community engagement? And if anyone would like to chime in.
I can say on my end, so we have probably a quarter of our projects. So we have 14 active external research projects happening, and about a quarter of them are in the pediatric space. The approval process on our end is a lot more specific. So we have to make sure that all of the clinical leadership on we always engage our clinical leadership, but our peds clinicians really want to make sure like what is in it and that there's very little risk. So that's, but there is often, those teams generally have a lot more success in terms of recruitment, because I think parents are really motivated to get new resources for their kids, and doing that extensive approval process kind of creates projects that parents might say, yeah, parents, caregivers might really be interested in. So.
So related to that, someone is also asking, how does rural health impact community engagement? If anyone would like to chime in with that question.
In my experience, it's still, again, the relationship building. It's just that in a rural environment, I mean, you're traveling longer distances and you're covering a wider expanse. But you still have to go to then a larger geography, a wider community, and ask the same questions and start building the same relationships. It's just yeah. It's the distance, I think, there that makes the difference. but it's still definitely worth it, especially since most studies are done on either coast. If you look at how they're scattered, if you look at scatter map, we need to get to rural more and help us understand better what happens, like learning that their doc is really 200 miles away, and what we put into a protocol to get them to do a blood draw is not going to work. So we have to figure out different ways of working, and we've got to talk to them to figure that out.
Thanks for sharing that insight. I'll leave about 3 seconds in case anyone wants to chime in before I go to the next question. All right, so this is also a question for all. Have you worked with community health workers, and what was the experience like? One would like to chime in on that.
I can start on that end. We have one project that's engaging community health workers, and then we have, I think, 2 that are in the application phase. One is around the oral health space, getting community health workers connected to kids with extensive dental issues. The really cool thing about that is there's like the legislation around being able to have community health workers is be reimbursable at some point. So that's actually like a really good place for an intervention to happen, because if the research team is kicking a little bit of money, and then we can get reimbursed for those appointments, and if they're research related, like that checks all of the boxes. So I think being really, when you're thinking about protocol, sometimes it's like, oh, the health promotions worker will do this, or a social worker will do this, or being flexible about what those roles are. So we actually had one team that wanted to work in our social drivers of health team, where we have care navigators working with patients, and we're like, this would be a great project for a community health worker. Can we put them in that space? And the team was flexible enough and knows our organization enough to be like, let's do it. That's works well for us. So yeah, I think that can be a really good synergy to be able to have CHWs integrated into the research projects.
I think you're muted, Diane.
Okay, sorry, I thought I did the other way around. So I actually did a project in diabetes space, working in Texas, and we ended up on the border. I don't speak Spanish, and the community health workers were actually conducting courses, education in the community. They were kind enough, gracious enough to let me sit in and translate for me. They were the most effective way of getting information out. They are part of the community. If people don't know, they are people who have no degree to 10 degrees. It's not the degree, it's how they really manage and understand the resources and the needs of their community. And I haven't seen anyone be more effective.
Thank you so much. The next question, this is for Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Mackenzie Brown, and it is, how could students at your institutions help with community health engagement?
So maybe I'll go first. So again, it depends on how engaged the student is with me. So for example, my mentors that are working with me on research project, again, from the beginning, they understand the importance of the community, right? Because what we are trying to teach really is for every research you're doing, even when you're thinking about your research questions and what have you, having that thought process about how to work with a community health organization, embedding it in them is what I hope and I've been trying to do with the students that I mentor here. Now, for students at large, finding, I'm not sure you can just walk to a community organization and just start working with them, right? But finding a person that's already doing that here will be helpful. For example, also at UIC, we have iChare. It's a whole department that's what they do. Being able to integrate yourself with them and be able to have that hands-on experience will be helpful.
So for us, we're fortunate enough to have a School of Public Health, and the master's level public health students have been extremely helpful, and they are already interested in public health and in the community. And so there's a synergy there with those students. The other students I have not so much been involved with, but public health students have been very helpful.
Thank you both for that. And the next question, this is for Diane. What is the role of CROs in engaging community health organizations?
So since we are serving also the needs of the sponsor, we want to ensure diversity in their studies. So what we do, and we know that building these sustained relationships really takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, and we don't ourselves have the staff to do that. So we work with first of all, we build it into our budget with the sponsor. And we work with organizations, for-profit and nonprofit, that help us get reach into the communities that would help to fulfill the needs of the protocol. And we actually really insist, because we know that we're going to get the people. We're not necessarily going to get the people through the existing sites. We have to get people to the site. And so part of what we're doing is also educating the sponsors with whom we're working with.
Thanks so much. And our next question is for Beth. This question is, how can research engage with you when you don't have any or much funding?
We don't do a lot without funding. So, we get approached all the time to put up flyers at clinics. We don't think that that's a successful way to engage patients. They won't get a lot of people that way. And B, if even I can think about this week, I was probably approached 4 times last week to put up flyers. If we would say yes to all of them, we just don't have enough space, and all of our flyers have to be behind laminated areas because of Joint Commission standards. So we have an option. We do a quarterly newsletter that we just rolled out, where we if a flyer is approved and it's somebody that we've worked with before, we'll put it on a website page and send it out in the newsletter. But we just know that's not a great way to engage with patients. So really, I think the lower levels of funding that we engage in is doing more passive research, where between $7,000 and $10,000, we're able to work with our business intelligence team to create a report of potentially eligible patients and send a text message or a MyChart message about an opportunity. But that's kind of the lower level engagement that we have. So most of the projects that we approve are further very active recruitment and an intervention at our site, because we want to make sure that it's really meaningful for us, and we don't want to waste researchers' time either. So it's not a great answer, but it's the more important to build that into your budget and know the realities of that.
So we've got one more question before we have closing comments, and this is for Doctors Ibrahim and Mackenzie Brown, and this is what resources at your institutions have been helpful in working with community health organizations?
So here at UIC, we do have trained staff and programs to community engagement. We have dedicated staff to all those programs. That's what they do, that we work together. And then we also get to work with community health workers. So it's like a hands-on approach here.
And we have some community advisory boards that are sponsored by our institution that I discovered in the process of doing this.
Yeah, a lot of, I think yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for answering the questions, as well as the audience for asking the questions. So before we close, we have time for each of our speakers to provide 1 or 2 key takeaways from the conversation today. So I will start with Diane and let you end with any final closing remarks, and then we'll go around.
Okay, well, mine is around budget. Having the courage have the courage to really build this into your budget. As you build relationships with the community-based organizations, ask them what it costs. Ask them what it really takes to do their events or however they think that can be effective, and try to get some estimates so that you can build that into your budget with your sponsor. Again, the sponsors are highly motivated to do this. The FDA is looking for this in their results. So take advantage of that and really build the budget and ask for the money to get this done.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. Maybe we can go with Beth next.
I'm happy to go next because I was going to say exactly the same thing. Funding is important, and then also flexibility. So like if you have a training, you're like, this training, we're supposed to do it, it's an hour long. If a community site's like, our meetings are like 45 minutes long, and so the training needs to be 30 so we can do our own stuff in it. Say yes to that and be able to be flexible with your protocol to make it work at a community health center.
Next, Dr. Ibrahim.
Right. So my key takeaway is pretty much that you have to identify a community-based organization that fits your project and fits you. And in that organization, you have to identify the best person that's going to work with you and deliver for you. And as you're doing that, you also have to understand that it's a bi-directional relationship, right? What is in it for them? It's not just the money, it's not just paying for their time. That is important too, but it's not just paying for their time. And the most important thing is that you have to show progress, for the length of time they're spending with you. You have to show progress as far as your research work is going, how much research you're doing, and then what is the impact in the community you're working with.
And I will finish up with the final thing I would just add is that, especially to the people that asked about their institutions, I had no idea that this was even available at our institutions, that our institutions participated in this until I looked. So, you never know what your institution is doing in terms of engaging in the community and having these community advisory boards. And so, that's an easy place to start if you've never been involved before. It's a familiar place that you can go to start and then branch out from there.
And then I would add, coming from a philanthropic organization here, just don't overlook some of the funding that philanthropic organizations can provide in this space. Speaking of, or listening to the fact that budget is one of the key takeaways. And then something I feel like I heard consistently throughout this whole conversation is bi-directional relationship, that it is a relationship. It shouldn't be something that's just transactional. So I think everyone can learn from all of the insights that you've shared today. So now I will hand it off to the Cures team to close us out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tammy, for being such an excellent moderator. And thank you to the entire set of speakers, Tammy, as well as Dr. Ibrahim, Dr. Mackenzie Brown, Beth, and also Diane, for such thought-provoking insights for our community. We're thrilled to have this topic and look forward to having future topics. I want to thank all of our health equity funding partners and others that are involved with Cures Within Reach, and also want to thank all of you attending. Really appreciate your time today and look forward to providing more on this topic of community-based engagement generally in the coming months. So thank you all for attending and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.